guy.
Okay, welcome everyone. We have an extremely important guest today. Today, we're bringing you someone who has completely flipped the script on how we understand water. Dr. Gerald Pollack is the legend behind the discovery of the fourth phase of water, a state that exists beyond solid, liquid, and vapor. Think structured water, living water, the stuff the ancient cultures honored and modern science is finally catching up to. He's a professor of bioengineering at the University of Washington. He's written award winning books like The Fourth Phase of Water, and his work opens the door to understanding everything from cellular energy to consciousness itself. They say never meet your heroes, but I strongly disagree, especially today, because this man happens to be a personal hero of mine, and he did not disappoint whatsoever. So maybe you should pick better heroes like Jerry Pollack. Hi, Jerry, welcome. This is a huge honor. So happy to have you. How are you?
I'm great, and I think you overstated. Thank you for all the accolades, which I don't deserve, but thank you anyway.
We disagree. We disagree. And as we were discussing before going live, you've been an instrumental part of myself trying to understand my own work and finding examples of your exclusion zones. And yeah.
Well, you're very kind. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. Anyway, looking forward to whatever you want to discuss, at least about topics of discussion about which I know something. Happy to be a part.
Maybe do you want to just give us a brief rundown of what you covered today in your presentation? Because one part of the streaming is we got a shill for Steve for people to buy the online passes to actually view this amazing event because I don't know if he's broken even yet, and I don't want Steve washing dishes. So on that case, what will people be expecting to see in your presentation?
Well, I'm happy to wash dishes, Lucy, if that works. I have experience, I have a lot of experience, so no problem at all. Well, what I presented was a phase of water that we all know that water has, we learned that water has three phases, solid, liquid, and vapor. We discovered the fourth phase, and this phase it's kind of like a liquid crystal. It's in between solid and liquid, and it has the consistency of like honey or the consistency of a gel, and it fills your cells. It fills all the cells in your body, and the way that you I didn't mention this in the talk, but one way that you can discern that the water that's inside your cells is not liquid water as the textbooks assert, but is this kind of gel-like water. You take a razor blade, if you have guts enough, and, and run the razor blade along your forearm. Okay, and I know there aren't too many people who are willing to do that. So what happens is blood comes out, but water doesn't come out. You never see water coming out of a wound. And I have some friends who are surgeons, and they tell me, they can cut deeply inside some muscles or whatever, deep in the abdomen. They'll cut right through, and no water comes out. And if no water comes out, then obviously the cells don't contain liquid water. Blood comes out for sure, but the water doesn't come out. And the same thing with the run of the razor blade along your forearm. Water doesn't come out. Now, if the cells were filled with water, the water would come pouring out like from a breached pipe, but that doesn't happen. So, another way you can discern that what's inside of your cells is not liquid water, is to crack open a raw egg. Now, everybody's cracked open a raw egg, and if you look at the egg white is not water; it's a gel, right? And so it's pretty clear that the water that's inside your cells is not liquid water as the textbooks assert. And that makes a big difference because, you know, if your biological understanding is built on the idea of liquid water, but it's not liquid water, then your understanding is going to be wrong. And that's largely what I was talking about today. I went through history, understanding about water, and the history begins, our work stands on the shoulders of giants, and one of the giants was a guy named Gilbert Lynn, who many people think should have won at least 2 Nobel Prizes, but his ideas were maybe too unorthodox, and so he passed about 5 years ago, and not too many people knew about his work, but a handful, more than a handful of people, and that's how we got started. I was in a different field. I was in the field of muscle contraction, trying to figure out how muscles work at the molecular level, how the proteins, mostly myosin and actin, interact with one another to produce motion, force, whatever. And one day I was exposed at a conference to the work of this guy, Gilbert Lane. And I was blown away because he was asserting that the water inside your cells, my cells, is not liquid water, but he called it structured water. Other people would call it ordered water because the water molecules, he was arguing, the water molecules were not randomly disposed, as is the case in liquid water, but instead the molecules were arranged, were ordered like soldiers at attention, lined up. And I was just blown away by what I heard at that conference. He had so much evidence, and there were other people who had evidence to support his point of view. And so I went home and back to Seattle, and I don't trust myself because I don't know, maybe I consider myself something of a romantic. I hear some idea and it appeals to me, and I jump on it. And I get really excited about it.
Love it.
And I got excited about this. So just to make sure, you know, like pitching yourself to make sure this is reasonable. I gave one of his books, and his books are really difficult to read because he lacked the gift of clear writing. Anyway, I gave it to a few of my students who I thought would be capable of understanding and evaluating. And really what I asked, I wanted confirmation that I would not be on a wild goose chase if we started pursuing the field of water and following onto Gilbert Lane. And they confirmed that in their view, his idea was extremely cogent and reasonable, and it was filled with experimental evidence. So it was then that I jumped into the water, so to speak. And when we started, it was just trying to confirm what Gilbert Lane was talking about. Well, we did confirm that the water was ordered, but we found other features of the water that I think are really important for understanding. And without going into huge detail, without slides, it's a little bit difficult. But we found that the water was indeed ordered, and also to our.
We found that there's also different particles of water that start forming, and this is a key part of my own work. And if you don't mind maybe getting into a little bit more of the technical details of those different particles.
Well, the particles, I'm not sure which particles you're talking about, but the water, the water forms this different kind of water, this four-phase water forms clusters. The clusters are really large. They're not necessarily particulate in nature. They can, it's actually surface sheets of water that they form honeycomb sheets. So you start with a surface, such some sort of like a protein surface or another macromolecular surface.
Your membrane.
It could be the membrane, but also the molecules that are lodged inside the cell. You know, proteins, for example, I think it's something like 70% or so of the solids inside the cell are proteins. And proteins, they kind of do the work of the cell. And on the surface of the protein, one of these sheets or layers of, we call easy water, easy to remember, easy water. It actually stands for exclusion zone. Because this kind of water excludes extraneous material.
Like that right there.
Well,
At the very top.
like that. Yeah, sure. Could be. So these sheets stack on one another, and yeah, that could be. Yeah, indeed, it could be exactly what we found. Yeah, the sheets stack on one another, and you get up to. We've seen 1 million sheets, for example. They're molecular thickness, so they're pretty thin. And this easy water that we found, it could be up to 1 millimeter, for example, which would be, roughly, if my arithmetic is right, maybe 1 million of these sheets. And one of the important things is the sheets typically are charged. They're not neutral. They're negatively charged. And the region beyond the sheets are positively charged. So when you have negative next to positive, you have a battery. And we demonstrate proof of principle. You put one electrode in the negative part and another electrode in the positive, and you get electrical current that goes. And the electrical current can light an LED, for example. So we know that they are genuinely, the charges are genuinely separated. And why is this important? It's important because this is the water that fills your cells. What it means is that the water that's inside every one of your cells contains energy. So you kind of think about where does the energy come from? You run a marathon, where do you get the energy? Well, the accepted understanding is that it comes from the molecule ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And in theory, what it is that this has got 3 phosphates attached to it, and one of them has particularly high energy, and that high energy is the energy that runs your life. Right? That was discovered in 1941 by a guy named Lippincott, who was well-known. I think he was a Nobel laureate, and everybody was excited about that. Everybody, finally, we figured out what's the energy that runs your body. Well, it turns out that it's not quite so clear as that. There have been people who have done experiments. There's one group in particular, Morales and Podolsky. I happen to know these 2 guys because I was in the muscle field, and they're in the muscle field. And these are, excellent researchers, and they found there's no such thing as a high energy phosphate. So, and others confirmed essentially their point of view. So right now, I guess the situation in the field is there's one idea that ATP supplies the energy, and that's the prevailing view. And there's another idea that it doesn't. And if it doesn't, the question is, what does?
I believe hydrogen through water.
Well, it could be another, and that is something that could be studied. What I was leading toward is this battery-like effect that we have confirmed is the supplier of energy. So we don't know at present. We did experiments and we found out that this battery-like effect helps to run your cardiovascular system. It probably runs a lot more in your body, but we don't know for sure whether ATP is really doing the job, or electrical energy that I've been talking about. The shares of the role could be, if the idea of ATP running it is wrong, it could be that all of our energy comes from this battery-like effect.
I believe it is that way. battery-like effect, but actually engineer your exact battery-like effect and how I do my multi-layered electrodes for the anodes and cathodes for my self-running hydrogen reactors now. So I've created with zero electrical input in these just salt water 2-jar batteries with scrap metal that produce and run hydrogen on themselves for about 6 months, and it's specifically engineering getting the water, the connecting rods, one in the negative, one in the positive zones of the water to get the charge differential.
Oh, that's fantastic. So interesting. Well, yeah, I mean, there are so many things that are run on electricity. Wouldn't be a surprise if our body is run on electricity.
Yeah,
Oh, I love
100%
that.
it
I'm
is.
like, can we go there, Jerry, with your electron theory on when we breathe?
Okay.
Your thesis, my favorite.
Well, thank you for that question. Yeah, so prevailing view by almost everybody, including myself until recently, is, we breathe, and what's in the atmosphere? Well, it's oxygen is 18 or 20% or something like that. Nitrogen is 80%. Nobody understands exactly why there's so much nitrogen in the atmosphere. And there's a little bit of argon, maybe 1%, and there's some CO2, a very small trace amount of CO2, carbon dioxide. Okay, so we take a breath, and we fill our lungs. And the prevailing view is that the oxygen in the atmosphere, not the other gases, that somehow the oxygen is extracted and it goes from the lung, little sacs called alveoli, like little balloons, many of them, and just behind them are capillaries. And so the idea is that somehow the oxygen in the atmosphere gets inspired, or all the gases get inspired, and the oxygen then diffuses somehow from these alveoli, these little sacs, into the capillaries that are just outside them. And the oxygen then diffuses in the bloodstream. It diffuses to all the tissues that use the oxygen. So now, I, I thought so too until I began thinking about it. And when you start thinking about it, you begin to wonder, how is it that it's the oxygen that diffuses out of these little alveoli to the capillaries? What about the nitrogen? How come the nitrogen doesn't diffuse? Nitrogen, the molecule is smaller than oxygen, and yet it somehow it's accepted that it doesn't diffuse. But nobody has brought up the understanding of the mechanism of what could achieve that. So I began scratching my head, wondering about it, and then I started wondering whether it's maybe it's not the oxygen that diffuses, but maybe it's electrons from the oxygen, because we need electrons. Electrons run our lives. We're negatively charged. All the cells in our body are negatively charged, and some of the extracellular tissues also are negatively charged. So I began wondering, maybe it's some property of oxygen, or some feature of oxygen that goes from the alveoli to the capillaries. And I could imagine that it could be electrons that are extracted or extractable from the oxygen, because the body needs them. And we found also that easy water, which is critical for life, fills every cell. You can create easy water simply by putting electrons, adding electrons to ordinary liquid water. So if you want to build easy water in your cells, all you need to do is supply electrons. And so the possibility is that the electrons are extracted from the oxygen, and the electrons then are transported to the cells via the capillaries, via the bloodstream, and then the electrons are delivered to those cells, and those electrons create easy water, which is what's needed. Support for the idea came from fish. I studied fish a little bit. I have a chapter in my book that's just coming out called Charge, a chapter on how fish swim. It's not so obvious how fish swim. You know, they fish can dart forward in a stream, running upstream at tremendous velocity with hardly any movement at all. So the idea of how fish can propel themselves is really not so clear. But I've been studying that, and I'm suggesting a mechanism by which the fish can do it. So I'm a little bit familiar with fish physiology, and it turns out, you know, fish are very much like us. They have tissues. The tissues, the cells are filled with easy water and such, but they don't breathe oxygen. You know, you take a fish out of water and it dies. Right? It doesn't breathe. So how does it get it? How does a fish work? Well, it takes in the water. It sort of breathes the water, and the water may contain the food, but basically, the water that the fish through the mouth that the fish takes in is nurturing the fish and doing whatever is necessary to keep the fish going. And I found in my casual reading that, or maybe less than casual, the water goes in, and of course the water's got to go out. So where does the water exit? Well, you know, those characteristic gill slits, the curve looks like a parenthesis on either side of the fish, and the water comes out. And it turns out that the water that comes out has a low pH. It's positively charged, and I argue that that positive charge that comes out is involved in the propulsion of the fish. But it brings to light something important, because if neutral water is taken in and positive water is pushed out, there must be some negativity.
That's not electrolysis, because like in my own reactions, the water that comes out from like it's neutral going in, and then it's super alkaline coming out.
Well, if it's super alkaline coming out, yeah, then it's got a negative charge. In this case,
so it's acidic the other way.
well, what comes out of the fish has been measured, and it's acidic, so it's positive, which means the fish must somehow absorb negativity. And you know, otherwise there's no balance. It doesn't add up. So this is, you know, supportive evidence that if the fish somehow needs either oxygen or negativity, it's not oxygen that it needs, because it's not extracting oxygen, but it is extracting negativity from the water.
Yeah, it's extracting the charge from
the charge from the water.
Extracting the charge.
It's the charge. And so if you extrapolate back to the human, it's supportive evidence that what you're taking into your body is not necessarily the oxygen, but the charge from the oxygen. Yes. So thank you for asking that. Yeah, we published a paper on that about a year ago, speculative paper, but somehow it seems to be attracting attention.
But that's what real science is, right? It's like we have to think outside the box. The box, we already know all the corners. Anyway, to get advancements, it's like we need to be multidimensional.
I agree with you so much, but modern science is not that way. If you ask yourself the following question, it's really revealing. Ask yourself, in the past 50 years, how many scientific revolutions can you name that have occurred? And I don't mean technological revolutions, because they're well supported. I mean fundamental scientific revolutions like the splitting of the atom, 85 years ago, or the genetic code discovery. That's
like once we get quantum or the supposed singularity, right? That's the next one, but we aren't there yet, and there's been nothing in between. It's like,
well, quantum mechanics and such, that's 100 years old.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
But we get to even get the working quantum computer is the thing, right?
Well, that's technology.
Yeah.
Technology is well supported by a lot of money.
Yeah, it's proving the point, right? We've got the quantum, like, science, but it hasn't even done anything in 100 years. like.
Hasn't done very much. I'm right with you on that. So what's the reason? You know, you could say, well, maybe scientists are stupider now, or maybe all problems have been solved.
I wouldn't say that.
I wouldn't say that either. I did an informal study. I went with a clipboard in the cafeteria at my university, in the sort of medical environment. I asked the question, and the question I asked was, of all the fundamental science that could be known, what fraction is known? Some people said, oh, less than 1%, which is, of course, what I think we all would agree. But many of them said, oh, maybe 75%. You know, so a lot of people, these are researchers who think, you know, it's pretty much well known. All we have to do is dot the I's and cross the T's. You know, so, but the system is set up in a way to guarantee that we're not going to have breakthroughs. And the reason is actually very simple. So I take the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health. Right. I have an idea, and I want to get funded for it. So I have an idea that the Earth is round, and everybody around me knows that the Earth is flat. Right? So what do I do? Well, I have some so-called preliminary data. You know, I took off from Albuquerque, where this meeting is being held, and I went west, and I stopped in San Francisco, and then I stopped in Tokyo, and then I stopped in London, and then I stopped in New York, and I came back to Albuquerque. So, you know, if it's flat Earth, I'm not easily going to get back to, yeah. So I'm thinking, well, gee, you know, this is really important because I have this radical idea, and I would really like to get some money, get a grant to study what's going on, right?
I'm showing you one.
Yeah, sure, right, yeah. So I write a grant proposal. I take 2 months, and I carefully edit it, and I submit it to the gatekeeper of, say, the National Science Foundation. And the gatekeeper looks and says, "Oh, Pollack, I never heard of this guy. I wonder, is he for real or is he a crackpot?" So how do I judge that? Well, I hire the expert reviewers to find out. So who are the expert reviewers? The experts in flat Earth, and I'm proposing round Earth. What chance do I have for success?
Right.
Practically zero. And the system, this is an extreme example, but the system is set up this way. It's set up with experts, and experts like to continue to be taken considered experts.
So they're experts in how nothing else is possible.
That's it.
Their
Right.
current paradigm.
And that's why canny researchers know that if they want to survive in the system, they better hold their radical ideas to themselves, because they're not going to get the money, and they're going to be tarred as crazy radicals. And so scientists, like everybody, you know, need to feed their families. So you got to do what you got to do. Proposing round Earth to a flat Earth community is not the way to go. And that's why we don't have.
But what about if you point out that on the horizons every day they can see that it's larger than when it's like at noon, when it's directly above, when it's smaller, and that's the exact opposite of a flat Earth model that can only be possible with the lensing of a round horizon and an atmosphere.
Well, you know,
we're still going to get shut down, right? They're
not going to
accept the science.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I mean, this is an extreme example, but there are examples in every field. There's a way of thinking, and if you challenge the way of thinking, you're not going to get money. And if you're not going to get money, your lab will collapse. And if your lab collapses, you know, you'll be on food stamps.
I find it interesting that people that will argue, or they'll have the belief with flat Earth or round Earth, will also sign up for the simulation theory, which would kind of, you know, be a mixed message on the strong belief.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure, what inspires people to follow belief systems, certain belief systems that kind of don't make sense. I I remember when I was a student, a graduate student, and I read the physiology book with medical students, and I tried to understand it. And there's one subject that I particularly remember, and it's how the kidney works. And I was at an absolute complete loss. I read through, and at that time, I thought, what's in the textbook must be correct, right? Because it's in the textbook. I now have a different view, but at that time, I thought, well, I must be too stupid because if it's in the textbook, it must be correct, and everybody else probably who's reading the textbook can easily understand it. I couldn't understand it. I read it over and over and over again. I find out now a couple of things. First of all, there were lots of other people who couldn't understand it either because it didn't make sense.
It wasn't coherent
It was,
information.
right, it was not coherent information. So that's the, that's the difficulty. And the textbooks, they perpetuate false narratives because you're a publisher of a textbook and you want to sell copies. And if you put what seems like crazy ideas, rebellious ideas, you're not going to sell too many books because the instructors who teach this stuff, they want the standard story. And so they won't buy a textbook that's built on radical ideas, even if those ideas are appealing. So the false ideas are perpetuated for basically indefinitely. And so I think one thing I learned is that please don't trust the textbook. I have my own gauge, and if the idea that's presented makes sense, if I don't have to read it 6 times to get the idea, then I think, well, good chance it's correct. If I really struggle and twist my arm, twist every limb in my body to kind of understand it, now I think, well, I'm not so sure it's true. That's what guides me and what perpetuates me. And I know it's a radical point of view, but
Not really. It's like nature is simple, and it's simplicity, and just following nature is that's how the world and the universe works.
well, you think it's simple. I think it's simple, but not everybody else thinks it's simple. Take quantum mechanics, for example, or quantum electrodynamics, which was a subject that was discussed today. So I remember reading Richard Feynman, the great Nobel physicist, who was also had a sense of humor. And one of my students was well studied in physics. He said, Jerry, you should read Feynman's book, QED, Quantum Electrodynamics, because it's really important. And I was reluctant. He said, you got to read it. You really got to read it. So I picked up a copy of the book, and it's a thin book. I thought, it's got a pretty cover on it. I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a try. So I opened the book, and there's a foreword written by, I assume, a friend of his or a colleague of his. And the message in the foreword is, you won't understand this book, but read it anyway, because it's very important. So that's a great enticement to read the book. And then I was sure that I would be rescued by what comes next, which is the preface written by Feynman himself. He said, you won't understand this book. He said, and the reason I can tell you that you won't understand it is my students don't understand it, and even I don't understand it, and I invented it. so I, I go past these 2 sterling introductions to what I'm about to read, and I couldn't get past 5 or 6 pages. I simply could not understand it. I gave up. So now, does nature is nature built on simplicity? If it is, then there's something wrong going on here. But many people take this as fact, and you heard presentations today that are built on quantum electrodynamics. So the physics community absorbs this stuff as though it's a given. Of course, it's part of nature. Some other people are more skeptical because as you suggested, nature operates in simplicity, and this is anything but simple fluid.
Right?
It's abstract mathematics. Did Mother Nature understand abstract mathematics?
It's like if they're the way I see it is like anything that's that complex into the theory of everything, you either have to be like God itself to be comprehending and computing it all at once, or once we get like the quantum computers. But trying to actually make sense of it in a human mind, you're gonna lose your mind trying to comprehend it all.
I think that's the
better.
most like fascinating information is that water can bilocate and trilocate and pass through walls, like the whole quantum tunneling that they when they're trapped,
Right, but so
you know,
that's
and
the
they're able
difference.
to, you know, teleport. That to me is
But that's you focusing on one aspect and just doing a scientific method, which is key. That's like making it simple, as opposed to trying to like understand all of it at once.
It's problematic. And, you know, water presents it really presents a challenge for all of us to understand. There are so many phenomena that we don't really understand. Remote vision, teleportation, telepathy, and these have been demonstrated to be valid past lives and such. And it's a challenge for science to figure out how it works. And if we believe in the principle of simplicity, it ought to be simple. But as far as I can see, nobody has figured out how it might work. And maybe once we do, maybe there'll be a violation of the law of simplicity. Maybe it'll be complicated. I doubt it, but this is the frontier that needs to be figured out. If we start building on the principle of simplicity, it restricts the number of options we have. But it's a complete mystery now, at least as far as I know. Maybe some of you have a better impression of what might be true and how all these interesting phenomena can be explained in simple ways. That's the challenge. I think this is the future of science, and water is at the heart of it because it seems that so many of these phenomena somehow involve water. Even memory. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Rupert Sheldrake, his views. He thinks of the brain as for example, as not where all the information is stored. He thinks of it as a transducer, and the information is somehow out there. He calls it morphic resonance. The information is out there. It's like your TV set. You know, it doesn't contain the information. It's the transducer that makes the information that comes from elsewhere visible for us. So his theory is that's how the brain operates, and you know maybe something along those lines is possibly the way life works and the way these exotic phenomena can be explained.
And all through water.
right.
Water.
We come from water. The water breaks when we get here. Our cerebral spinal fluid is, you know, mainly composed of water, like 99.9%.
Sure. And blood also is basically, you know, is mostly water, blood plasma.
Right, and the plasma state specifically, and it's like that's this higher dimensional state of matter and then of water being into that blood plasma. It's like
Well, blood plasma, but yeah, the plasma, it's I've always found that difficult to understand. Plasma is filled with negative and positive charges, and I learned in middle school that when you have a plus charge and a minus charge, they recombine, and so how do they remain separated in the plasma state? I mean, I have no answer to the question. I'm just raising that
right,
question.
the reality that there's all of these anomalies happening.
There are anomalies, right. So the challenge to figure out is not simply to accept them without question, but to probe them deeply and figure out. It's really our job as scientists. You know, we have an observation, and our challenge is to figure out how you explain the observation. It's not being done today. You know, much of science is involved with dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Um, and sometimes to do that, it results in horrible complexity, daunting complexity, and then one has to wonder, is nature really so complex? We all have thought that nature is simple. And so probably, at least I think, when you come upon the correct mechanism, it's going to be very simple, and it will explain much more than you thought it ought to be explaining. Things fall into place when you've got the right idea. I've been working on the atom, for example. Now, that's been around Niels Bohr, 120 years now, approximately. And we all learn about the atom. And I would guess that you guys around here doing this recording probably.
I have a different model.
Okay, you have a different model. I have a different model too. So I'm so glad.
My model goes along with your model. We'll have to discuss models at a later time.
Okay, well that's great. But you know, it's in the textbooks. It gets the standard model gets repeated, repeated, repeated. So most people think, since it's been around for over a century, it must be correct. You know, it's reflexive that it must be correct. But there are some problems with the model that are so obvious, even obvious to a middle school student, why it doesn't work. And yet, you know, the belief system is pervasive. Everybody starts with that model. Quantum mechanics adds to the basic model, the basic idea that we've got a nucleus, which is positively charged, electrons, or electron clouds that are negatively charged. And nobody raises the question, right, how come those electrons don't collapse?
It's like they should be collapsing on themselves, or it's like the rotating part that also has been proven wrong, but it's like that's perpetual motion, which supposedly can't exist. So it's like, what's going on here? All of it, right? Like,
yeah, right. And I guess, you know, it probably takes guts to challenge it, because the whole world believes that that model is essentially correct. You know, two things remain to be deduced. So quantum mechanics has added to the cloud of obscurity, I think, because anything that doesn't work, it has to do with quantum mechanics, and you can't understand quantum mechanics? So you better go back to school and study mathematics for 5 years, then you'll understand, then we can talk.
Right, yeah.
So
Well,
this is problematic. Yeah, so main message, not only in water, but in all aspects of science, which obviously we agree, you need to go back to the foundation, because if you build on a foundation that's incorrect, the edifice that you build is guaranteed to be complicated and wrong.
Cracked, and it will shatter and fracture at some point. It's just what's going to fall with it.
Yeah, what's going to fall
Now,
with it.
Jerry, you have a book that is coming out next month. Where can everyone pre-order?
Well, you can order on the publisher's website, but I can't give you the link this way. But you can order on Amazon, for example. If you order the publisher, same as ordering on Amazon, you know, free shipping or the same charge for shipping. But it helps to fund future work. But anyway, you can order on Amazon, pre-order. It's available. And September 16th is the delivery date, so it's not so far in the future.
Oh, I'm so getting it. I'm pre-ordering it tonight.
Well, thank you.
Absolutely.
No, the publisher is actually, this is self-published, and yet it's done very well and won all kinds of prizes. And the reason for self-publishing is if you go with a standard publisher for a book, like for example the Charge book that's just coming out, they'll charge $125, $150. We charge $35.
Wow.
And the reason is we're interested in dissemination. We're not interested in profit. I mean, it would be nice to make a little profit. So far, and all the previous books together, it's been a loss. And the reason one reason it's a loss is that we spend a lot of time and take extreme measures to take account of the reader. The illustrations, the diagrams and such, they're done by my son, who's extremely gifted. Every diagram is produced with great care. It takes a long time. So you know, we actually lose money.
Right, and it's because it's a passion of love and education and trying to help. And that's what real science is.
That's what real science is, yeah. Science has really gone astray. And we actually have an organization to combat that problem. It's called the Institute for Adventure Science. And I'm the executive director, founder of this. And the idea is to collect money from private sources and use this money to fund ideas that challenge mainstream views. I have to admit that we've not been completely successful because anybody who's interested, good-hearted people who have done very well and like to fund science, they would like to decide for themselves which science, not give the money to us and let us decide. Yeah. Although we've developed a mechanism to pick out, I think, with very serious vetting, the most promising of science to fund. So maybe in the current political system, something like that will come to be.
It needs to happen because we are falling behind the East, and it's because of Hungary.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
We're falling behind like the East of like China and Russia and stuff in technology, and it's because we're like too arrogant and
hubris.
Hubris. There we go. That's the word. Hubris. Thank you. Wow, that's funny.
Yeah. Well, I think the system of funding science needs to be seriously revised. We know how to do it. It just needs to be done.
So, sadly, my partner Jeremiah couldn't be here this year, but we were originally planning on demonstrating a reproduction of where we used acoustic-only input to transmutate aluminum into iron, and then as well another one where we were using white arc plasma and electrolysis to transmutate hydrogen into helium. So we will hopefully be here next year.
We missed you, Jeremiah. Wish you were here.
Wow, if you can do that and demonstrate it, the world is waiting for that. There's so much resistance against the idea of transmutation. There's a periodic table, and it's considered so fundamental that it's impossible to transmute one element into another element. But it's been demonstrated countless times that it can be done.
So many. And I am the alchemist, so it's like that's my calling. You have to prove it, have to demonstrate it, don't have a choice. But it's like they're putting $1 trillion into CERN and hot fusion, and it's like, oh, it's another 10 years away, and it's like we have countless people with structured water and just a little bit of electrolysis or plasma or whatever inputs everywhere, achieving LENR and full fusion, and that's where the real investment needs to be.
Agree. Totally agree. Yeah, I would like to see that happen. But and so industry is providing some funding for it, but in terms of fundamental science, if you put in a proposal to the National Science Foundation, they'll laugh at you. You won't get to first base.
Well, that's why I'm doing both. That's why I'm doing the aluminum and iron and the hydrogen to helium simultaneously at an event, because then it's like we're gonna take samples, we're gonna get them tested, and then it's gonna be so easily reproduced that no matter how hard they try to debunk it, it's like it's going to reach the breaking point that if academia really tries to debunk it like they did to Pons the Fleischmann, where they intentionally left certain details out to crud the findings, that it's like they're just going to be crudding themselves at this point because everyone else will be doing it successfully.
Well, you're
hopefully my plane doesn't crash.
Yeah,
next year.
There are some forces that are working against you. So I'm not sure what the solution is. And if we find the truth, so many things will follow. So many technologies and understanding of science. We need to get there. It's absolutely true. And biology, um, it will be once if it could be demonstrated uh, that transmutation is occurring, all of biology will differ.
Because it's happening in the body everywhere.
And
you're well aware of this.
I'm well aware of it. Yeah. And, what I found recently, I was reading the book by Louis Kervran called Biological Transformations. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
I'm not.
Well, yeah, he's talking about biology, and the book summarizes a huge body of data. And Louis Kervran was a famous, well-respected French scientist, and he was put in charge of figuring out what are the causes of disasters. For example, there's an explosion in the mine and it kills 25 miners. What happened? He was in charge of figuring out. And he writes that he spent 10 years doing that and he couldn't figure out the answers until he realized that transmutation was occurring. Then all the answers fell out. And so he was a proponent of transmutation and studied it and wrote several books. And the famous one is actually not written by him, but it's a compendium of information taken from several of his books, in which he describes published evidence for all kinds of transmutations that are occurring in biology. And if you simply think about it, it turns out that people have measured in plants, for example, and I believe in animals too, that we contain practically every element in the periodic table. And so the question is, well, where do we get these elements? Now, there are some very simple plants like an air plant, or the mosses that grow on wires and have no roots. So in that latter case, the only source of those elements would be rain, right? Because they have no roots. And so, does the rain contain every element in the periodic table?
Wow. Maybe that's why it's maybe that's why it's illegal in certain states. You're not allowed to collect rainwater.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe. Sure, it's got lots of gold.
I've got one more critical question for my own work and yours. What is the bulk water state you're referring to?
Well, liquid water. The term that's used by
Okay, so
scientists.
what about so it's not when it's a heavy water state, and how does heavy water fit into your organization? And what am I able to talk about publicly in my own work when it comes to myself making those sort of things, and then other hydrogen isotopes?
Well, I can't answer that question.
Who do I ask?
Yeah, but ordinary
He had to try.
water contains deuterium, so it's not H2O, it's D2O, a very small fraction of it. And it's found experimentally that if you could deplete the water of the deuterium, get rid of the D2O, it confers health. So there are various ways to get rid of the deuterium oxide, and we recently carried out a series of experiments on deuterium depleted water. You can actually buy it. We got a gift from a supplier, and it turns out that if you use deuterium depleted water, the EZ water the amount of EZ water increases. So this possibly could be the reason why deuterium depleted water is good for health. Not sure, but it's a possibility. So,
yeah. And I think we'll have to wrap it up because you had an appointment
I had
20 minutes ago.
20 minutes ago.
Appreciate this.
It's been a great pleasure. You guys are kindred spirits.
100%. And we will have to do this again, even if not here. We will get your information, and
Sure.
we will do remote podcasts as well because there's a whole lot more to discuss.
Thank you, Jerry.
Dr.
It has been truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for the really great questions. You guys are terrific.
That was
The
very
best.
appreciated.
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay.
Yes, you do.